A spoiled guest spit on hotel doorman, never realizing he had just insulted the CEO's son. What followed next would shock everyone. The Grand Bellview Hotel, standing tall in the heart of Manhattan, was the very picture of elegance. Its sparkling chandeliers lit up the marble floors, reflecting light in every direction. Guests in designer suits and glamorous dresses moved gracefully through the lobby, their laughter and chatter blending into a soft hum, while the staff worked quietly to keep everything perfect. At the entrance stood Kevin, the doorman, at 6 feet tall, with sharp posture and a calm presence. He was more than just a man opening doors. He was the first impression of the Grand Bellevue. Known for his warm smile and respectful manner, Kevin had a way of making every guest feel welcome. Tonight, however, the air felt different. The crowd was heavier, the energy charged, and Kevin's sharp eyes scanned each arrival, ensuring nothing slipped past him. Being a black man in such an upscale, mostly white space, Kevin had learned to endure subtle insults and arrogance. Yet his patience, built through years in hospitality, had always been his strength. For him, this wasn't just a job, it was a choice. He wanted to experience every part of the family business. What most people didn't know was that Kevin wasn't simply a doorman. He was the CEO's son, learning from the ground up. Outside, a light drizzle had started. Kevin stepped forward with an umbrella to greet a couple arriving in a sleek black town car. "Welcome to the Grand Bellevue," he said warmly, his deep voice steady as he guided them safely inside. The woman smiled gratefully, and Kevin returned to his post as usual. But just then, raised voices broke through the calm hum of the evening. A man was approaching the entrance. His crumpled shirt and worn shoes stood out among the polished suits and gowns. His steps were heavy, almost angry, his face twisted with irritation. He shoved past the waiting family, forcing the father to pull his son close. Kevin stepped forward smoothly, blocking the way with his usual calm authority. "Good evening, sir," Kevin said firmly. "I'll be glad to help you, but I'll need you to wait just a moment while we assist other guests." The man froze, glaring as if Kevin had spoken nonsense. "Wait? Do you even know who I am?" "I don't wait," he snapped, his voice dripping with arrogance. Kevin didn't flinch. He had handled plenty of guests like this before. "I understand, sir, but I need to make sure everyone is served in order. Someone will help you shortly." The man's face darkened, his voice rising loud enough to turn heads across the lobby. "I'm not here to be told what to do by you. Do your job and let me in." Kevin's composure never cracked, even as dozens of eyes now watched. "I am doing my job, sir. Please step aside, and I'll assist you as soon as possible." But instead of backing down, the man stepped closer, jabbing a finger at Kevin's chest. His voice boomed across the lobby. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're just a doorman. I'm paying more for one night here than you'll see in a month." Kevin's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression stayed calm. He refused to let the man's arrogance break his professionalism. This wasn't the first time Kevin had dealt with entitled guests, but the man's loud, aggressive behavior was crossing a line. Kevin calmly stepped back, keeping his hands folded in front of him. "Sir," Kevin said firmly but politely, "I'll need you to lower your voice. We have other guests here, and I'd appreciate your cooperation." The man's face turned red with rage. "Don't tell me what to do," he shouted, his voice echoing like thunder. He waved his arms toward the lobby, where several guests had already begun recording the scene with their phones. "This is what's wrong with people like you. You don't know your place." Then, without warning, it happened. The man spat at Kevin. The spit landed squarely on his cheek, and the entire lobby gasped in shock. A woman nearby covered her mouth, while a security guard by the reception desk rushed toward the entrance. Kevin froze, not out of fear, but in control of himself. Slowly, he reached into his blazer, pulled out his pocket square, and wiped his cheek. His hand shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "Sir," he said, locking eyes with the man, "that behavior is unacceptable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man laughed bitterly, still defiant. "You think you're better than me? You're nothing. Nothing. By now." The security guard, Sam, a large, broad-shouldered man, had stepped between Kevin and the guest. His voice was calm but commanding. Sir, I'll need you to step outside. Your behavior is unacceptable, and we can't allow you to disturb our other guests. The man scoffed, brushing him off. I'm not going anywhere. I have a reservation, and I'll be damned if some doorman or rent-a-cop tells me otherwise. Sam's tone didn't change. Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities. The lobby grew silent. Guests who had once been chatting now stood still, watching. A young couple whispered in disgust. An older man near the concierge desk shook his head. Kevin stayed rooted. His face calm, though inside he felt anger, humiliation, and an unshakable resolve. This wasn't just a test of his professionalism. It was a test of his character. The man's bravado began to fade as Sam reached for his radio. Fine, the guest spat, his voice dripping with disdain. I'll leave, but you haven't heard the last of me. Sam kept his body between Kevin and the man, guiding him to the door. When the glass door shut behind them, the lobby exhaled as one. Kevin straightened his jacket and looked around. He didn't want sympathy or praise. He just wanted the moment to pass. But the silence was quickly replaced by murmurs as guests whispered about what they had just seen. Some walked up to Kevin with words of support, but he simply thanked them, his face still composed. Just when it seemed the ordeal was over, a deep, steady voice cut through the room. Kevin, everything okay here? The lobby turned to see a tall man, in a navy suit, walking toward the entrance. His silver hair and commanding presence left no doubt. It was Richard Bennett, the CEO of the Grand Bellview Hotel, and to most people's surprise, Kevin's father. Kevin gave a small nod, still wiping the last trace of spit from his cheek. Yes, sir, everything's under control. But Richard's piercing eyes had already shifted to the man near the exit. His polished shoes clicked across the marble as he walked with purpose. The guest, suddenly sensing the change, hesitated. His confidence faltered. Excuse me, Richard said, his tone measured but firm. Are you the guest who thought it was acceptable to spit on one of my employees? The man froze, glancing between Richard and Kevin, his arrogance now tangled with nervous fear. I didn't know he worked here, he stammered. The man tried to defend himself, mumbling excuses, but Richard's expression didn't soften. Difficult? Richard repeated, his voice sharp enough to cut through the man's words. That difficult doorman happens to be my son, and regardless of his position here, no guest has a right to treat anyone in this hotel with such disrespect. The man's face turned pale. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The reality of what had done hit him hard, and suddenly all his arrogance looked foolish. Richard continued, his voice calm but firm, filling the room. This hotel is built on respect and dignity. If you can't live by those values, then you don't belong here. A few guests clapped quietly, but the applause quickly faded back into silence. The man, utterly humiliated, turned and left without a word, disappearing into the rainy night. Kevin stood still, his father's words echoing in his mind. He hadn't needed Richard to step in. He could have handled himself, but hearing the truth spoken aloud felt deeply satisfying. More importantly, it showed everyone watching that respect was non-negotiable. As the revolving doors closed, the lobby slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, but the mood had shifted. This wasn't just an angry guest causing a scene. It was a moment that carried weight, leaving everyone with something to think about. A woman in a black cocktail dress approached Kevin nervously. I just want to say, she began softly, the way you handled that, it was remarkable. You showed more grace than most people ever could. Kevin gave her a polite smile. Thank you, he said gently. Sometimes it's not about reacting. It's about setting an example. Across the room, a young bellhop whispered to a coworker, his eyes filled with admiration. Man, I hope I can carry myself like that one day. Richard stood nearby, arms crossed, quietly watching. He wasn't a man of big emotions, but the pride in his eyes was clear. Walking over, he placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. You've got a good head on your shoulders, he said quietly. Not just tonight, but always. Kevin looked at his father, and for a brief moment, they shared an unspoken understanding. Thanks, Dad, he replied, his words heavy with meaning only the two of them could fully grasp. The incident had done more than expose one man's prejudice. It had forced everyone present to think about their own values. Respect wasn't optional. Dignity wasn't negotiable. As the lobby returned to its polished elegance, Kevin couldn't help but hope the moment would leave a lasting impression, not just on the man who stormed out, but on everyone who stayed and watched. For Kevin, this wasn't just another ugly encounter. It was a reminder that strength doesn't come from retaliation, but from holding your ground with dignity. He knew the man who spat on him might never change, but perhaps someone else who witnessed it would. Just then, a little girl tugged at her mother's hand and walked up shyly. "You were really brave," she said, looking up at Kevin with wide eyes. Kevin crouched down to meet her gaze and smiled warmly. "Thank you. But bravery isn't always about fighting back. It's about knowing when to stay calm." The girl beamed and ran back to her mother. Richard, watching quietly from the corner, gave Kevin a subtle nod before heading to his office. Kevin straightened his blazer, returned to his post, and greeted the next arriving guest with the same warm smile as always. The incident faded into the rhythm of the hotel, but it wasn't forgotten. Guests later told the story to friends, and some even left notes praising Kevin's professionalism. For many, it wasn't just about prejudice. It was proof that true strength lies in grace under pressure. And for anyone listening now, remember, the roles people play don't define their worth. Respect, dignity, and kindness should always come first. No exceptions.